This video related to equitable monitoring is centered on a couple of key concepts. One is the goal setting process, and the other is the whole idea of creating the type of goals that are SMART goals. But one of the things I would want to point out in the introduction of this particular video is that these are activities that need to occur on an ongoing basis. And so when we set goals, it's not a matter of just having them set and then looking at them at the end of the year. There needs to be put into place the whole notion of monitoring progress toward meeting these goals, and systems need to be put into place where there are ongoing conversations about these goals that are important to set and the progress that's being made. Now, I know that some measures you'll collect at the end of the year, but also you want to be thinking about measures that are collected, that are available, that can be collected during the course of a year. Because in that regard, you're able to monitor and, most important, make adjustments with what you're doing with your children. So what are some of the key considerations as you think about goal setting? Here's a concept that comes from Jim Collins' book, Good to Great. And he refers to this as big, hairy, audacious goals. You want to be thinking about goals that create stretch in your school and in your district, and that will allow you to become a better organization on behalf of the children you serve. But as you think about what those goals might be, you can't focus on everything. So the next concept is you need to consider this concept of greatest area of need. And the only way to determine that is through being on that journey of data collection to help you understand within all the data you have regarding the progress of your kids, what sticks out as bearing the most attention, that creates the biggest pain points for kids in terms of the progress that they're making as learners. The other thing that I would assert is that you need to have a limited number of goals, because you can't focus on everything. You want to make sure that you have the capacity to focus on the kind of goals that you'll be setting and actually be able to pay attention to them on an ongoing basis. In a while, I'll explain what I mean by this concept of SMART, but you want your goals to be framed in SMART ways. And then I'm going to go back to a concept that I shared in a prior video, and that is you want to ensure in goal setting that you have a dual focus on accountability and support for those doing the work. One alone is insufficient. And then finally, this whole notion of creating and encouraging a growth mindset. Are kids growing? What measures will tell us that kids are growing? And you want to be able to establish goals that can assert that growth is occurring. And if not, to be able to point you in directions that you'll be able to have the kind of conversations about doubling back and reestablishing goals that will focus on the actual growth of the kids. What is that greatest area of need? I've referred to it already, but in reviewing the data, the areas that demonstrate the greatest need for improvement. And here, there's some useful tools that the State Department of Public Instruction discusses around different types of gaps. So greatest area of need can be defined regarding this notion of gaps in performance, but I think what's useful here is that there are more than one type of gap that you could focus on. Accountability gaps, proficiency gaps, and or change over time gaps. Your focus on goals may be in all three areas. It may be in a couple of these areas. What is that accountability gap? That tells you how far your most recent data is from the target to which you hold yourself accountable. It could be a state target or it could be aligned to the district strategic goals, but the concept is, what is that target and what is that distance from where you are to that target? It's called perhaps one that we're most familiar with is the proficiency gap. It tells us how far your current performance is from the 100% of the kids becoming proficient or advanced. As we want all students to be proficient, this represents your vision or stretch goal. Working with school districts and schools, I know there can be a struggle around setting a goal with 100% of all kids. My encouragement is that you do in fact set goals with that type of stretch. Because in the end, there's this 3-letter word that is very important in education, but it can be very difficult and complicated, and that's this notion of all. The word all. If we want all kids to become proficient, and why would we not, or to become advanced in their proficiency, using that terminology, there's other terminology that can be used. We want to be able to know how far we are from reaching that type of target. It's critically important. And it's also important that for your communication to your publics, that they know that you clearly do have a focus on meeting the needs of all children. And then the third gap is referred to as a change over time gap. It tells you how far your most recent data, and you could use percent proficient and advanced, is from the target to which you hold yourself accountable. It could be a state target or aligned again to the district's strategic goals. What kind of change are you making over time toward that target? Other areas of thought about greatest area of need. I think the biggest point I would want to make here is that improvement work, goal setting work, monitoring of those goals should align to your district's. What are your strategic plan? Does your charter proposal, as an example, align with those key goals? That's an important consideration in terms of looking at this notion of system alignment, because with limited resources, you want to be able to make sure that you're demonstrating that you know what those district and school goals are, and that you're aligning your effort to improve toward those goals. Have these goals been defined in a way that allows them to be measured? This whole notion, and you'll see this in a while around this concept of SMART goal, you need to have indicators, measures that will help you be able to actually monitor the progress that kids are making. And then finally, realizing that not all schools or school districts have a strategic plan, there should be goals. And what are those key goals that have been defined that maybe exist outside of having a strategic plan? So one key consideration is this notion of alignment. And what do you want to align to? You want to align to a district strategic plan to the extent that it exists. And you want to be able to demonstrate that you have measures that will help you monitor the progress of kids in meeting those types of strategic objectives. So within that strategic plan, ensuring there are specific goals defined in the plan, and then looking at this concept of what are the measures that are aligned to those goals. You need to think about those measures on the front end. And I know that work can be a struggle, but you want to be able to look at those goals with the idea of, at the end of the day, what would help us know that we are making progress? So you have to think about goals and measures at the same time. You want to be able to identify a baseline year, especially if you're looking at change, or that concept of change over time gap, and then actually identify what type of gap the goal will actually track within those 3 gaps I shared with you. That's one way of doing it. There are other ways that this can be done, but just trying to frame this around the importance of focusing on all kids, but at the same time, focusing on kids that are furthest away from meeting our standards. So another key consideration to be thinking about in terms of goal setting is the alignment to Wisconsin's accountability requirements. And here, I personally believe that there's been some good work done, and at least in outline, what are the requirements that we want for all schools and all school districts meeting. So how do your goals align with Wisconsin's accountability requirements? And Wisconsin includes a focus on outcomes in 4 priority areas. So let's take a look at those. First and foremost is student achievement. Those are measures the level of knowledge and skills among students compared to the state and national standards. And it includes a composite of reading and math by all students for all tested grades. We know that there's a critical focus within our state on reading and math, and it's looking at measuring the level of knowledge and skills compared to state and national. But when you're thinking about goal setting, this is clearly an anchor point for you to consider. The state also defines as part of their accountability system closing gaps. And I referred to that earlier as one way to frame goals. They indicate it shows how the performance of student groups experience statewide gaps in achievement and graduation are improving. The whole notion is lifting all kids up. And yes, there needs to be a dual focus on meeting the needs of all learners within the district while you're working to eliminate these important gaps in performance for some kids. So it recognizes the importance of having all kids improve while focusing again on kids that are furthest away from meeting our standards. Third part of the Wisconsin accountability system is on track to graduation and post-secondary readiness. Those indicate the success of students in achieving the educational milestones that predict success. And here they include graduation and attendance rates and measures of third grade reading and eighth grade math and ACT participation. And back to graduation and post-secondary readiness is a critical measure for you to be thinking around goal setting. And then finally, they assert two student engagement indicators: absenteeism, percentage of kids whose attendance is 84% and below, and dropout rates below 6%. So again, if you're trying to think about goal setting, you want to look at this notion of greatest area of need within your data. That's an anchor point. Another key anchor point is around these gaps in performance. And then you can also look at an anchor point in setting goals and monitoring goals around the district's and school strategic plan. And finally, what does the state assert as key accountability requirements? So here we're going to talk about the goals being framed around this notion of being SMART goals. And this is not a new concept. There is an author that's written widely around the notion of setting SMART goals. She and Jan O'Neill, I offer as a reference for you to consider, have written numerous articles and books regarding this work. So SMART stands for your goals need to be first and foremost strategic and specific. You can't have them general and strategic, in particular around that notion of alignment to strategic plan. Second, they need to be measurable. And a lot of places struggle with and figure out what those measures would look like. The strongest advice I can give is to reach out to people that are good in this measurement area to have them offer you ideas around the measurement of goals. A stands for they must be attainable. Yes, you want stretch in your goals, but you need to be thinking about incremental progress, reasonable progress to meeting those goals, and they need to be framed clearly with stretch in mind, but you want to be anchored in attainability. And you want to be able to be results oriented. I think to meet the accountability externally, and we certainly have observed that increasing around the accountability for schools, you need to be able to demonstrate that you have the kind of results that you're hoping for. And then finally, you need to have them be time bound. You need to set goals that with particular time reference points where you can reassess and perhaps change that time frame, but you need to put time bound frames to your goals. And there can be multiple levels of SMART goals, and my advocacy is around having a system that's aligned. So you want district SMART goals that are challenging, inspiring, far-reaching. You want school and charter as an example, where you prioritize targeted areas based on student needs. And then finally, within schools, you want team goals focused on specific skills, knowledge within shorter time frames. So the whole idea is that if this work is done well, you end up with system alignment between district SMART goals to school SMART goals to team SMART goals. And that would conclude the information I would like to share with you around this notion of key considerations in setting goals, the whole idea of around those goals being SMART goals, and then finally, the importance of monitoring those goals on an ongoing basis. And finding a tool that will help you monitor the progress of your students is